Hi, Hasida, just testing that you can hear me. Hi, everyone. We'll just wait for a few minutes for people to join and then let's get started. Hi, guys. We'll give it a few minutes and then get started. Just giving some time for people to join. Hi, everyone. So let's get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Very quickly, I'd just like to know who's in and where people are joining in from before I get started. If you guys could just write in the comment section, that would be great. Your name and where you're joining us from. All right, not getting much audience participation, but we'll fix that as we move on. So I just wanted to start off by giving an introduction about myself, just very briefly, talking about my journey starting Red Lotus, and then really I'd like to spend this time with all of you in a Q&A format, answering any questions you might have and starting a discussion about it. I'm very curious to hear the questions this audience might have for me. So very briefly, my history is I was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in Sri Lanka until I was 18. I went to school at Stafford International, and after finishing at Stafford, I started my undergraduate at Harvard College, where I majored in computer science. While I was an undergrad there, I did computer science research in the area of human-computer interaction and machine learning. And one of the topics I was interested in, having come from Sri Lanka, was applying technology for landmine detection. I did some research in that space during my third and fourth year. That research was published, and it was noticed by the US Department of Defense. While that research was kind of making its rounds, I started my PhD in computer science at Stanford. And once I had finished my first year at Stanford, I got a research grant from the Department of Defense, and the request from that grant was to figure out whether I could commercialize the research work I had done as an undergraduate, at which point I took a leave of absence from my PhD program at Stanford, and I started Red Lotus. As some of you might know, Red Lotus is a company that builds products to help the US military clear areas of landmines, IEDs, buried explosives. We've been in existence as a company for 8 years at this point. The first 5 years of our company, we spent commercializing the research concepts I had developed into products, and we've been selling that product for the past 2 years at this point. And really, the core problem this company, Red Lotus, is trying to solve is how do you build technologies and systems to assist people in clearing areas of potential threats. So those threats might be over the ground, they might be tripwires, for example, or they might be buried threats such as landmines or improvised explosive devices. This is a very broad topic. There are lots of technologies and techniques used for clearing areas, both in the military context and in the humanitarian context that some of you might be familiar with. We work on a piece of it that's focused on supporting dismounted soldiers. So how do you support human beings who are tasked with clearing areas? And this is a very broad area, and I can go into it if there are more questions. So I'd like to take a pause there and kind of open up for questions. I'm really happy to answer questions on any topic, especially entrepreneurship, what it's like to transition a research concept to a product that's on the market, risk taking, what it's like to take a risk and start a company, and also I can talk in more detail if there's interest about the topic of landmine clearance or military area clearance. So with that, I will take a pause and look forward to questions from you guys. And if you have a question, just please put it in the comment section on the feed. Okay, so we have a first question in from Minori. Thank you for the question. How do you? So the question is, how do you create uh, a product that is profitable as well as one that is socially conscious slash ethical? Cause at the end, because at the end of the day, you are dealing with uh, people's lives. Um, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Minori, for asking it. Um, and I look forward to follow up questions based on my response, because it's a complicated complicated answer with a lot of nuance to it. So when I started doing research in the space, and even when I was thinking about starting a company around it, I was really interested in the humanitarian aspect of it, which is how do you uh, clear land post-conflict, for example, in places like Sri Lanka? How do you build technology for that humanitarian, socially conscious effort? And what I found out in trying to do that is it was very, very difficult for me to get the funding support I needed from the humanitarian segment of the market. Uh, in my space, you need to understand that most of the money in the humanitarian space is put towards hiring people and setting up NGOs to do clearance work, and not much money uh, comparatively to the defense space is put towards R&D and developing new products. So I really had no option other than to partner with the US military to get the required R&D investment in order to build this product. With that said, it's not a black and white. That there isn't a black and white distinction between the humanitarian space and the military space. What I've realized in working with the US Department of Defense is that there is a lot of technology transfer, knowledge transfer between the US military, US Army, and those who do humanitarian demining research. Those two communities are linked very closely together. And more recently, I've noticed that our products, primarily when we started, all our customers, all our money was coming from the U.S. Department of Defense. More recently, we've had interest and some traction in the humanitarian space, and that's a long way of saying that there isn't a, at least in my case, the there was only one path towards achieving social impact, and that was going through the military angle. But that angle did end up working out because we were able to have a humanitarian impact, and we will continue to have that impact. But definitely, there is this aspect of having to cater to both the military segment and also the humanitarian segment. I hope that answers your question, Minri. If you have a follow-up, I'd love to respond. And does anyone else have any questions? That was a very good question. again, to reiterate, I'm happy to answer any questions on entrepreneurship, what it's like to take a product from a research concept to product. And talk about the particular problem we're solving. So a couple of more questions came in. One is from Isaru, which is how do you apply your computer science knowledge in the defense sector? That's an interesting question. As the company has matured and grown, I'm doing less and less technical work, but I'm still involved in R&D. I think how I stay involved with my computer science knowledge in my sector and my space is the products we build rely on cutting edge sensing. We have to think about some robotics problems. And when we have to think about those problems, my computer science training definitely helps out. And I also, one of my specialties in computer science, one of the areas I specialized was human-computer interaction. And in human-computer interaction, one of the key pieces of training we get is to understand how to design computing technology, computing interfaces to meet user needs. And that's a skill that I'm applying constantly when I'm having to think about how we upgrade our current products and design new products to meet the needs of our users. So long story short, I use my HCI training quite a bit, and when we're dealing with hardware knowledge on algorithms, software engineering, sometimes data communication comes into play on that topic. I hope that answers your question, Isru. I'm happy to answer follow-ups. The next question is from Hasita, which is, can you tell us more about the research you did? Yeah, so the research I did was trying to answer the question of how do you help humans who are searching areas with handheld detectors to be safer and more efficient. One of the big problems when you have a human sweeping a metal detector, a handheld metal detector, is they're getting a lot of feedback from this device, which is beeps and buzzes. And one of the questions they need to answer is the thing buried under the ground something that could be a landmine or an IED, something that's a threat, or is it something harmless like a wire or a nail? This is actually a big problem because a vast majority of the signals that someone sweeping a metal detector gets is from harmless items. I think there was a statistic from Cambodia, just off the top of my head, that said for every one landmine they found, there were over 100 false positive signals. So this is a big problem. How do you deal with the false positive issue? So in thinking about that, one of the research questions I tried to answer in my undergraduate thesis is, how do you capture the feedback from one of these handheld metal detectors and visualize it, and maybe even apply pattern recognition and machine learning to make a determination of whether the object that's generating the signal is something that is potentially dangerous. And that was the topic I explored with my research. In a nutshell, taking audio feedback from a handheld detector and mapping it visually to help people operators make more informed decisions about what's in the ground. That's what got me started. I hope that answers your question, Hasita. Happy to talk about it more. Asel's question is, could you explain a bit more about your vast product and how it differs from other counterparts that are serving the same purpose in the current market? Yeah, so the product we build is tailored at helping to train soldiers to use handheld detectors, specifically training them on how to sweep and search an area when they're using a handheld detector. And the core offering is doing very precise tracking of their training and then giving them feedback to say, visual feedback to tell them where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and how they could improve. So before we got onto market, the Army had a system, and there was one system from Europe, and there have been a few, one or two more competitors that have come into the space. The way our product is different, and I would argue in certain dimensions better, is that we have the only product that fits in a handheld carry case that weighs less than 20 kilograms and can be set up in under 10 minutes. It requires very little training. So really the reason our customers choose our product over our competitors is that our product is very easy to use, is very portable, and it works with just AA batteries. So I would summarize all of that to say the reason we have an edge over our competition is how user-friendly and easy to use our product is compared to everyone else. And that advantage was achieved by developing on a technology that enabled the product to be useful and low power and lightweight, whereas competitors are using different kinds of tracking technology to create their products. Next question from Prabodh. How did you end up starting the company in the US, given that you are not a citizen of the US? So I think the short answer to that question is you do not have to be a citizen of the United States to start a company in the United States. You do have to have valid residency in this country to start a company, but there is no requirement for people who start companies in the United States to be citizens of the United States. That's the short answer to your question. So when I started the company, I was already in the US as a graduate student. These are great questions. Please, I look forward to any more. No problem, Prabodh. Any more questions? I'm also happy to clarify any responses I had to previous questions. Please don't feel shy to ask any follow-ups or ask any question, really. I'm happy to answer anything. So there's a question about, could you elaborate a bit more about your time at Harvard? Yeah, of course I can. So I started at Harvard in 2006, and I graduated in 2010. So at Harvard, the way it works, because it's a liberal arts college, is you do not have to declare your major or your area of specialization or your degree until sophomore year, which is your second year. So the first year at Harvard, almost everyone spends their time taking a diverse set of classes from all kinds of fields to figure out what their interests are. People have a rough sense when they start, but really the majority of time during your first year is supposed to be spent exploring, which is what I did. I took classes in economics, applied mathematics, computer science, philosophy, and in sophomore year, also electrical engineering. In sophomore year, I made the decision I wanted to do computer science. I think that's one major difference in the United States compared to maybe Sri Lanka and some other education systems that people here might be familiar with. And also, in addition to your major or your degree, there was a requirement, at least when I was an undergrad, to take classes in areas outside, compulsory classes in areas outside of your specialty. So this could be requirements in foreign languages. For that, I did French. It could be requirements in writing, in the social sciences, which is actually very nice because it forces you to build knowledge and skills outside of your core discipline. I particularly enjoyed taking classes in philosophy. That was a real interest of mine, and I took a few classes in economics in addition to the computer science coursework that I had to take. Third and fourth year, the coursework builds up in your degree. The classes get a little more intense and advanced. And then in the third year, you have, it's really an option to decide, at least in computer science, whether you want to do research and write a thesis. It's not compulsory to graduate. I chose to do it because I was interested in this landmine detection problem that I described earlier. So I spent most of my third and fourth year focused on my research and finishing up my coursework. I would say that the third and fourth year were the most intense for me in terms of workload. And writing my thesis was probably one of the most interesting and rewarding things I did. The coursework was great, the classes were great, and I would kind of close up my response to this question by saying that having to take classes outside my major, I think was a really big benefit to me, and I really enjoyed it. I'm happy to answer more questions about that. Answer any follow-up questions. Oh, this is a good question from Prabodha. Was your company bootstrapped or funded? If funded, how was fundraising like? That's a great question. I get asked this question a lot because we are a startup company and we went from having nothing, from zero revenue to being a real business that makes sales to the US military. What's unique and rare about Red Lotus is that we actually were able to build a business without raising capital. So it was bootstrapped. And bootstrapping is very, very hard, very hard. Though if you can do it successfully when you're starting a company, there are many benefits, which is you retain control and you retain direction of the company, which my co-founder and I have. At this point, after almost 8 years of running the company, we still retain control and direction of the company, which is great. But to get to that point, it was really hard. We had to spend the first few years of the company really taking close to no salary. We were working for the company for free, so we wouldn't have to raise capital. We had to work really hard to get the U.S. military to give us R&D grants to build the product, and we also had to be very careful to make sure that we were managing the grant in such a way that once we were done, we would have the ability to retain technical ownership of the product and manufacture it, which it ended up working out fine. But there were a lot of things that had to happen to bootstrap a company in this space. And that's a great question. And I'm happy to talk to offline, even happy to talk to any of you who are interested in creating a bootstrapped company in the technology space or outside the technology space. Because I do believe a lot of the advice out there, at least within the United States, is catered at entrepreneurs who want to start companies through the traditional funding route. And there's not as much material for entrepreneurs who are interested in bootstrapping companies and building them and retaining control. But it is possible, and it is quite difficult. Thanks for that question. These are great questions. If there are any more, please feel free to ask. I'm curious to know, is anyone in this group interested in entrepreneurship? Any of you working on companies, starting companies? In the technology space or outside the technology space? I'm just curious to know whether anyone in this group is interested in being an entrepreneur. Another question from Prabodha, thanks. How did you cope up with the mental pressure as an entrepreneur? Thanks for the question. I'm happy to answer that. It's not easy. It's very, very hard, especially when you are trying to bootstrap a company and you are taking no or close to no salary for years sometimes. In our case, it was more than a year, I believe. It's very, very difficult. You have to really believe that there's going to be a payoff at the end of the day, that the sacrifice you're making in the near term will have a payoff in the longer term. And that's really hard. You have to really believe in yourself, and you have to believe in the product or project you're working on. And I think it really boils down to confidence, because if you don't have that confidence, it can be very scary. It can be really scary to to be in that position where you are taking a lot of risk and really deciding to work on something when you could be working a 9 to 5 job, or working a job where you're getting a salary or whatever it is, or advancing your career in another more safe manner. And I guess the only way to cope with that pressure is to really ask yourself, why you're taking that risk, and convince yourself that that the risk is worth it because you believe in your skill set and what you are spending your time working on. That's I think the only advice I can give about how to cope with that pressure of being an entrepreneur. The other part of it, I think, a big source of pressure during the early stages is, in addition to that fear and that risk, a big source of pressure is created because there's a lot of work and not enough people to do that work. Basically, at the start of the company, it was just myself and my co-founder, and we had to do everything. We had to do everything from engineering to accounts to defense compliance to legal. In fact, we had to do them for the first few prototypes we built. My co-founder and I built those products with our own hands. We did the soldering and the screwing and the sewing. We did everything. And that's a lot of pressure as well, because you're working a lot. You are doing a lot of different things that are sometimes within your skill set and sometimes totally outside of your skill set, like accounting and taxes. I've had to do all of it. My co-founder has had to do all of it. And that's fun. It's fun, but it's a lot of work. You learn a lot of different things. But it can feel stressful when you have to do all those things and there isn't enough time to do it and you have no idea how to do it. For example, we had no idea about how to file corporate taxes or how to set up the necessary accounting structures to get DoD contracts. And you can feel very overwhelmed during those times and feel a lot of pressure. But if you have the right partner, and you have the right belief in yourself, you can in fact learn something and learn something outside of your expertise and enjoy it. But that's a great question, Prabodha. Thanks for asking that. Next question from Asel is, this is a really good one. Did you experience failures? If so, what did you learn from them? Yes, we've. I think any entrepreneur who says they didn't experience failures lying or hasn't succeeded yet. I think failure is part of. Failure is just a part of entrepreneurial success. Specifically, some of the failures that we've had, when we were starting the company, we just had an idea. We had a concept that was based on my research. We didn't have a product design or a product vision. And during the early stages, we spent a lot of time trying different ideas, technologies, approaches, and a lot of them failed. We would spend time designing various products, or prototypes rather. We take them to users and they'd come back to us and say, this doesn't work. And then we'd have to go back and repeat that. So there's definitely failure in the product design, product iteration process that I don't think is unique to an early stage company. I think that happens at any stage of anytime you're trying to design a new product, you're going to experience a failure when you experiment with new ideas, new concepts, new prototypes. So that's one kind of major form of failure that'll probably keep happening as if if you are building a technology company that's innovating, failure is kind of a key component of innovation, in my opinion. Because if you're not failing, you're not learning. So to answer the second part of that question, so when you build various prototypes for new product ideas and you fail, the main thing to take away from that is when you're failing, you need to ask the question of why did this design or why did this product concept not work? What am I learning about the market and the users from this experience to help me design a better product or a better prototype the next time around? And if you can learn, if you can get insights about the market and the user from a failed design or a failed prototype, then you're definitely making progress, because the amount of failure will reduce over time, and then you eventually will get to the stage where you have a product that users love and they really want. So that's one kind of one mode of failure. I think the other major mode of failure that I've experienced in growing this company, and that I expect to keep experiencing, is when it comes to trying to build your team. So one of the big questions, one of the very difficult questions in growing a team is, how do you make the right hires? How do you select the right kind of person for a given job? How do you even define the job so you end up getting the right person? And then once you get that person, how do you make sure they're performing in the right way? Because especially as a startup company, there's very limited amounts of capital available to hire people. And when you do hire people, you need them to perform in short periods of time. When they don't, it really, really hurts. And during the past 8 years, we've made some great hires, but we've also made hires that haven't worked out for us. And when that happens, it really, really hurts a company because of the investment it takes to find people, to get them onboarded, train them, and then you trial them for 3 to 6 months. That's a lot of money and time that's invested. And we've made a few hires that have failed in that way. And I think, again, I would say the major thing we've learned from that experience is you fail, and then you ask yourself, well, why did we fail? Was it because we weren't clearer about the job description? Was it because our interview process was broken? Was it because we didn't incentivize the person we hired correctly? And then you do it again. There are some cases in which we've hired people, it hasn't worked out, and then we've asked ourselves, why did we even hire a person in the first place? Did we really need to hire? But yeah, that's another kind of major mode of failure is people and trying to find the right person for the right role. But that's an excellent question. Thanks for asking it. These are great questions. Are there any more? So the next question from Hasita is, as an entrepreneur, the learning curve is really steep. How do you keep up with it? What is your learning process like? Again, that's a really good question. The learning curve is very steep. I think the best way to answer that question is to kind of give a few concrete examples from my experience. So before I started Red Lotus, my expertise were in computer science, in research. I had some experience in thinking about how to interview users, design products, not a whole lot, but I had zero experience in business, in management, in finance, zero. I'm not exaggerating when I say zero. I had zero experience in those areas, which are critical for starting a business. And I think one of the nice things or benefits of being an entrepreneur is you are forced. You don't have an option. When you are trying to start a company, it's very obvious what needs to happen. And when that obvious thing happens, you have no choice but to go and learn how to do it. Because if you do not learn how to set up an accounting system, for example, your business will fail. If you do not learn how to create a budget and manage money, your business will fail. So when those situations arise, any entrepreneur who is worth their salt will ask themselves, what is the problem that I need to solve to keep my business alive and keep it growing, and then learn that thing. I don't think the right answer here is to learn for the sake of learning. I think the approach is as you keep building your business, it'll be very obvious where it's important for you to build knowledge, and then you just have to go and do it. And the way to build that knowledge is you use Google or you buy a book and you read that book, and you read books and you research as fast as you can to solve the problem at hand. One of the things I would advise anyone here on this point is, at least in the entrepreneurship context, is you should, when you have a problem that you're unfamiliar with and you need to learn an area or learn a field to solve that problem, ask yourself, how much of that field or that area do I need to learn in order to solve this problem? So, for example, if you have no experience in finance and you need to create a budget, you don't need to go and, at least at the early stages of the company, you don't need to be an expert in finance to create a budget. You just need to know enough to create that budget, and then as you keep going, you'll keep learning more. And yeah, like I said, my personal learning process is I'll figure out what the problem is, and then I will buy a few books in that space. I'll Google and I'll learn. I'll learn just enough to answer the question I need to resolve, and then I'll move on to the next thing that I need to learn about. But learning and solving problems is an everyday activity for an entrepreneur. It never stops, and I think that's one of the most rewarding and interesting parts of being an entrepreneur. But that's a great question, Hasida. Thanks for asking. Next question from Prabodha again is, if you were to start up again, what would you do differently? Excellent question. I need to think about that. I think one of the big reasons for failure or slow execution, when I reflect on the history of Red Lotus, has had to do with the lack of focus. It's very, very hard as an entrepreneur when you start a business to figure out what is the key problem that I'm solving for the customer, and how do I do that in the most efficient way. It's very hard to get down to focus yourself and focus your team to a clearly defined problem that has a solution. And during the early stages of being an entrepreneur, you tend to, at least I tended to want to solve big problems, grand visions, huge markets. But really, that's not what pushes a company forward. What pushes a company forward is asking very focused questions from a very small group of people. Technical term is, from your beachhead market, figuring out what the smallest market is that you can attack, asking very focused questions from users in that beachhead market and delivering a product to them as soon as you can and going from there. It's very, very easy and very tempting in this day and age to ask very broad, visionary questions and spend time and money trying to solve those problems when in reality that's not the way, at least in my experience, to build a company. So I think, long story short, what I would do differently is I would have focused sooner and put a product out to market sooner, instead of being distracted with broader visions and grander ideas. The caveat here is it's okay to have, I encourage you to have grand visions, but on a day-to-day basis, really, you have to, as an entrepreneur, be very focused on what the next milestone is and how you get to that milestone as soon as possible. It takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of humility to say, hey, right now I'm solving this particular small problem. Eventually I'll solve a much larger problem. But right now I want to focus myself and my team on this small problem. And I think that's something I would have definitely changed. So instead of taking 5 years to get to market, maybe we would have gotten to market in 3 years or 3.5 years if we had been more focused and disciplined. Next question is, what's the next evolution for Vast? That's a great question. So right now, our product is built to support the training paradigm. So how do you train soldiers to use handheld detectors to clear areas of landmines or improvised explosive devices? My vision, my broader vision, is to build technologies and systems where you don't have to have a human in the equation. So how do you clear a field? How do you check a field for threats without having a human in the loop? So when I say that, most of you are probably thinking drones or ground robots, and that's the general direction. That's kind of the big picture vision we want to get to. So the next step for us is, the question we ask ourselves is, what do we need to do to get one step closer to that vision? So what we're thinking a lot about is, how do we transition, as a next step, how do we transition this capability we've built for tracking and providing feedback in the training context, and then apply it to the field? So one of the questions we're asking ourselves right now is, if you have a team of people clearing a space and checking a space for landmines or IEDs or tripwires or whatever it is, how do you track and record their work to create a visual picture of where they've scanned, where they haven't scanned, what they've found? That's the next small step for us. Because if we can do that, if we can track a team of people on the field and provide the kind of feedback we offer in the training context in an operational context, then that gets us closer to be able to, maybe at some point, instead of humans sweeping that space, to be able to use machines of some sort to check the space. But to answer the question, the concrete next step is, how do we, we're trying to figure out ways to transition this visual feedback and tracking capability from the training context into the operational or live context, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to talk about that more if there's interest. Are there any more questions? These are great questions, guys. I'm happy to elaborate or answer any other questions. So next question from Hasita is, any advice for fresh graduates stepping into the industry? I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question because I didn't really step into industry. I went straight from school to starting a company, so I don't really know much about stepping into industry. I can talk if there is interest. I can talk about what we look for when we're trying to hire as a small startup company. I'm happy to answer that question. Thanks everyone for your time. It was a lot of fun answering your questions. I wish all of you luck. And if there's anything I can do to help, feel free to reach out. All right. Bye.